2 puppies begged for help before a statue of Jesus. But what happened next made everyone cry. At first it looked like a simple rescue. A custodian found them trembling in the cold, their tiny paws scratching at the stone. But what she didn't know was that the puppies weren't just asking for help for themselves. Something darker was hidden inside those church walls, a locked door, a smell of smoke, and whispers of a truth so dangerous it could destroy everything. As secrets unravel and danger closes in, the question becomes impossible to ignore. What were these puppies trying to reveal, and will uncovering the truth cost someone their life? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. The first rays of dawn painted the sky in gentle strokes of pink and gold as Faye Merritt walked the familiar path toward St. Bartholomew's Church. Her work boots crunched softly on the gravel, each step measured and purposeful, just as they had been during her years as a search and rescue handler. Those days felt like a lifetime ago now, though the memories remained as fresh as morning dew. The Gothic Revival architecture of St. Bartholomew's rose before her, its weathered stone walls telling stories of generations past. The morning light caught the stained glass windows, casting colourful shadows across the dewy grass. As church custodian, Faye had grown to know every corner of this sacred space, from the creaky floorboards in the nave to the temperamental lock on the garden gate. She was reaching for her keys when a sound stopped her, the unmistakable whimper of something small and frightened. There, at the base of the Jesus statue that stood sentinel near the church entrance, 2 tiny forms huddled together, trembling in the early morning chill. Puppies. 2 of them, pressed against each other for warmth, their little paws scratching desperately at the statue's base. Faye's heart clenched at the sight. They couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, 1 golden, 1 black, both with those oversized paws that promised future growth. "Hey there, little ones," she called softly, crouching down and extending her hand palm up, the way she'd learned in her handler training. The puppies startled at first. Then the golden one took a tentative step forward, nose twitching. "That's it, sweet thing. You're safe now." As she edged closer, her trained eye caught details that made her frown. Their paws were coated in something dark. Ash, she realized, rubbing it between her fingers. The scent triggered old memories from her SAR days. Woody, but with an chemical undertone that didn't belong. Her nostrils flared as she caught another smell, sharper and more concerning. The distinctive tang of accelerant, wafting from the direction of the vestry. The black puppy had grown bolder now, padding over to tug at her sleeve with tiny milk teeth. Both pups seemed to be trying to lead her toward the vestry door. Years of training kicked in as Faye rose slowly, following their pull. The heavy wooden door was locked, as it should be at this hour, but something felt off. A faint sound carried through the thick wood, a whimper, but not from a puppy. This was human, filled with pain. Her heart rate quickened as she pulled out her phone, muscle memory making her fingers dial the church office before she could second-guess herself. "This is Faye Merritt," she said when the secretary answered. "I'm outside the church and there's something wrong. I need someone from the board to come check the vestry immediately." She hadn't even finished speaking when a sleek black Mercedes pulled into the parking lot, tires crunching on gravel. Gordon Lyle stepped out, his tailored suit looking oddly out of place at this early hour. The board chair's presence was both unexpected and unwelcome. Something about the man had always set off warning bells in Faye's mind. "Ms. Merritt," he called out, striding toward her with the confidence of someone used to commanding attention. "What seems to be the problem?" Faye straightened her shoulders, meeting his gaze steadily. "Sir, I found these puppies by the statue. They're covered in ash, and there's a strong smell of accelerant near the vestry. I heard what sounded like someone in distress inside." Lyle's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his eyes. Something that made Faye's instincts buzz with warning. "Ah, yes. We've had some issues with trespassers lately. Probably some teenagers causing trouble." He waved a dismissive hand. I'll have someone look into it properly later. For now, just call animal control for the strays and return to your regular duties." The puppies pressed against her legs, trembling harder now. The golden one whined, tugging more insistently at her sleeve toward the vestry. Faye noticed how Lyle's eyes followed their movements, his gaze calculating, almost proprietary. It wasn't the look of someone concerned about strays, it was the look of someone tracking valuable property. "With respect, Mr. Lyle, I really think we should check the vestry now, if someone's hurt." "Ms. Merritt." Lyle cut her off, his voice taking on an edge of steel beneath its polished surface. "I understand you used to be in search and rescue, but that's not your role here. The vestry will remain sealed until we can arrange a proper inspection. Those are my instructions as board chair. Is that clear?" The words hit like a physical blow, stirring memories of another time she'd been told to stand down, to ignore her training and instincts. That decision had cost her, not just her position, but her confidence in herself. The suspension still hung around her neck like a millstone, a constant reminder of what happens when you challenge authority. But something was wrong here. Every fiber of her being screamed it, just as it had that day. The smell of accelerant, the ash on the puppy's paws, the pain in that muffled cry, and now Lyle's too quick dismissal. It all added up to something dark and dangerous. "Of course, Mr. Lyle," she said quietly, watching as satisfaction settled across his features. "I'll call animal control right away." She waited until he had walked away, phone already pressed to his ear as he barked instructions to someone, before making her decision. The maintenance closet near the chapel would be safe. She led the puppies there, creating a makeshift bed from old cleaning rags and setting out a bowl of water. They settled quickly, exhaustion evident in their tiny bodies. Faye's hand brushed against something in her pocket as she stood, her old SAR whistle, carried more out of habit now than necessity. The metal was warm against her fingers, familiar and reassuring. She thought of all the times it had helped guide people to safety, all the lives that had depended on her following her instincts rather than protocol. The church was emptying now, early morning silence settling over the grounds. Lyle's Mercedes had disappeared, leaving behind only tire tracks in the gravel, and an uneasy feeling in the pit of Faye's stomach. She had a choice to make, the same choice she'd faced before. Trust the system that had failed her once, or trust the training and instincts that had saved countless lives before her suspension. The whistle seemed to grow heavier in her pocket as she recalled the pain in that cry, the fear in the puppy's eyes, the way Lyle had looked at them like inventory rather than living creatures. Sometimes doing the right thing meant risking everything. She'd learned that lesson the hard way. But she'd rather live with the consequences of action than the guilt of turning away. The decision settled over her like a familiar coat, comfortable despite its weight. She wouldn't let this go, couldn't let it go. Not when every piece of evidence pointed to something sinister happening within these sacred walls. The puppies were safe for now, but there was more at stake here than just 2 lost strays. Faye checked her phone. No signal inside the thick stone walls, which might be for the best. Whatever she was about to uncover, she had a feeling it would be better to gather evidence first. The memory of her suspension still stung, but it had taught her valuable lessons about documentation and timing. She pulled out her small notebook, the one she'd carried since her SAR days, and began noting everything she'd observed. The exact location where she'd found the puppies, the type and strength of the accelerant smell, the timestamp of the cry she'd heard, Lyle's arrival and reaction. Details mattered. She'd learned that lesson well during her years of service. The morning light strengthened, streaming through the stained glass windows and creating patterns on the stone floor. Somewhere in the distance, church bells began to toll, marking the hour. Faye squared her shoulders and touched the whistle in her pocket one last time, drawing strength from its presence. Whatever was happening at St. Bartholomew's, she would uncover the truth. Not just for the puppies, but for whoever had made that pained sound behind the vestry door. The weight of her decision settled into her bones, familiar as an old friend. She'd been here before, standing on the precipice between what was easy and what was right. Last time, it had cost her everything she thought she was. This time, she knew exactly who she was, and she was ready to face whatever consequences came with following her conscience. Moving quietly through the empty church, Faye began her usual cleaning routine, but her mind was already mapping out her next steps. She would need to be careful, methodical, and above all, patient. The truth had a way of revealing itself to those who knew how to look. And if there was one thing Faye Merritt knew how to do, it was search for what others wanted to keep hidden. The puppy's whimpers echoed in her memory as she worked, reminding her of what was at stake. They had come to the statue of Jesus for a reason, their tiny paws marked with evidence of whatever dark deeds were being hidden behind these hallowed walls. Faye had always believed that nothing happened by chance. These puppies had found their way to her, and now she would find a way to uncover the truth they'd led her to. The morning sun climbed higher in the sky as Faye moved through the church, her movements purposeful but unhurried. To anyone watching, she was simply the custodian going about her duties, but beneath that ordinary exterior her mind was sharp and focused, every sense alert for additional clues. The puppies had shown her the first piece of the puzzle, now it was up to her to find the rest. She paused in her work to check on the puppies, finding them curled together in their makeshift bed, finally sleeping peacefully. Their presence strengthened her resolve. Whatever Lyle was trying to hide, whatever had brought these innocent creatures to the church's steps, she would get to the bottom of it. Not because it was easy, but because it was right. The whistle in her pocket seemed to grow warmer, a constant reminder of who she was and what she stood for. She might no longer wear the official title of search and rescue handler, but those skills and that dedication to helping others remained part of her very being. Today she would put them to use again, not in the wilderness searching for lost hikers, but right here in St. Bartholomew's, searching for a different kind of truth. The morning stretched on, each moment bringing her closer to whatever revelation awaited. Faye moved through her tasks with practiced efficiency, all while keeping her senses attuned to any additional signs of what might be happening behind the vestry's locked door. The smell of accelerant lingered in her memory, a warning sign she couldn't and wouldn't ignore. She thought about Lyle's dismissive attitude, the way he'd tried to minimize her concerns and redirect her attention. In her experience, people who worked that hard to prevent investigation usually had something significant to hide. The question was, what could be so important that the board chair himself would show up at dawn to ensure it remained hidden? The answers would come. She knew, but they would require patience and careful observation. For now, she had made her choice, to trust her training, to follow her instincts, and to seek the truth no matter where it led. The puppies were safe, but this was just the beginning. Whatever happened next, Faye Merritt was ready to face it head-on, guided by the same principles that had driven her throughout her career: protect the vulnerable, seek the truth, and never ignore a cry for help. The evening shadows lengthened across St. Bartholomew's grounds as Faye slipped back through the side entrance, her heart beating steadily with purpose. She carried a small backpack containing the tools of her former trade, items that had once helped her find lost hikers but would now serve a different kind of search. Old habits died hard, and she found herself automatically scanning her surroundings, noting exit routes and potential hiding spots. The church felt different at night. Moonlight filtered through the stained glass windows, casting colorful shadows across the empty pews. Faye moved silently, her footsteps cushioned by years of search and rescue experience. From her pack, she pulled out a small container of talcum powder, a trick she'd learned for tracking air currents in cave rescues. With practiced movements, she released small puffs of powder into the air at various points throughout the building. The fine particles danced in the beam of her penlight, revealing subtle air currents that most people would never notice. A persistent draft caught her attention, drawing the powder toward the basement level where the boiler room was located. Faye followed the trail, her senses heightened. The familiar weight of her rescue whistle pressed against her chest, tucked safely beneath her shirt. As she descended the stairs, she noticed how the temperature dropped several degrees. The draft grew stronger, carrying with it the musty smell of damp concrete and something else, something alive. The boiler room door was unlocked, which struck her as odd given Lyle's earlier insistence on security. Inside, the massive heating unit dominated one wall, but it was the stacked crates that drew her attention. They were arranged in a way that created a hidden space behind them, and from that space came the sound that made her breath catch, the weak whimper of a dog in distress. Moving carefully between the crates, Faye discovered a heart-wrenching sight. A mother dog, thin and wounded, lay chained to a pipe. Her eyes, though tired, held a gentle intelligence that reminded Faye of her old search and rescue partner. The dog's condition told a story of neglect and exploitation, probably forced to produce litter after litter for profit. "Easy, sweet girl," Faye whispered, slowly extending her hand. The mother dog's tail gave a tentative wag, and she allowed Faye to stroke her head. "We're going to get you out of here." The sound of voices from above made both Faye and the dog freeze. Heavy footsteps approached, accompanied by the scrape of something being dragged across the floor. Faye quickly dimmed her light, but remained where she was, one hand still resting on the mother dog's head. Two men entered the boiler room, carrying boxes labeled roofing supplies. They dropped them with little care, and the hollow sound suggested the boxes were empty. "Lyle wants it all cleared out by tomorrow night," one man said, his voice gruff with irritation. "Says the insurance inspector's coming end of the week." The other man grunted. "Timing's tight." "You sure the accelerant will burn hot enough? Can't leave anything for them to find." "That's why we're using the good stuff. One match, and this whole place goes up clean. They'll blame it on old wiring in the walls." Faye's blood ran cold as the pieces clicked into place. The puppies from this morning, the accelerant she'd smelled, Lyle's insistence on keeping people away. It was all part of an illegal breeding operation, and now they planned to burn down the church to hide their crimes. While the men continued talking, Faye reached into her pack and retrieved a pair of bolt cutters. The mother dog seemed to sense hope was near, staying perfectly still as Faye worked on the chain. With a muffled snap, the chain gave way. "Come on, sweet girl," Faye whispered, gently urging the dog to her feet. They began making their way through the maze of crates toward the door, moving as quietly as possible. They had almost reached the exit when disaster struck. Faye's flashlight, caught on the edge of her jacket, slipped from her pocket and clattered to the floor. The beam bounced wildly across the walls as it rolled. "What the hell?" one of the men shouted. Faye didn't hesitate. "Run!" she urged the mother dog, pushing her towards the door. They burst into the corridor together as shouts erupted behind them. The service stairwell was just ahead, their best chance for escape. They had just reached the stairwell door when a terrible crash echoed through the corridor. Faye glanced back to see one of the men wielding a crowbar, smashing it against the door they'd just passed through. The sound of splintering wood urged them onward. "Upstairs!" Faye gasped, guiding the mother dog towards the steps. The dog, despite her weakened condition, seemed to understand the urgency. Together they climbed, their footsteps echoing in the narrow space as angry voices and pounding feet pursued them from below. The blood rushed in Faye's ears as they climbed, each step carrying them further from their pursuers, but also leaving them with fewer options for escape. The mother dog kept pace beside her, their shared fear driving them upward into the darkness of the church's upper levels. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer, the men's shouts echoing off the walls. The metallic clang of the crowbar against railings sent shivers down Faye's spine. She knew they couldn't keep climbing forever, but for now, up was their only choice. Faye's heart pounded as she raced up the bell tower steps, the mother dog's labored breathing echoing behind her. The ancient wooden staircase creaked under their combined weight as they spiraled higher and higher into the darkness. Her flashlight beam bounced wildly off the walls, creating disorienting shadows that seemed to move with a life of their own. The footsteps below grew closer, accompanied by angry shouts that reverberated through the tower. Faye could feel the vibration of heavy boots on the stairs getting stronger with each passing second. The mother dog whimpered, her nails clicking against the worn wooden steps as she struggled to keep pace. "Come on, girl," Faye encouraged softly, reaching back to guide the exhausted animal. "Just a little further." A deafening crack split the air. The staircase shuddered violently as something heavy struck the railing below. Splinters of wood exploded upward, and Faye caught the metallic glint of a crowbar in her flashlight beam. The entire structure groaned ominously. Another savage blow landed. The railing gave way with a terrible splintering sound, and the staircase lurched sideways. Faye lost her footing on the treacherous steps, her body pitching toward the gaping darkness below. Pure instinct sent her hands shooting out, catching a support beam just in time. She dangled precariously, muscles screaming as splinters dug into her palms. The mother dog had scrambled onto a small landing above, but now stood trapped and trembling, unable to go further up or back down. Her frightened whines pierced Faye's heart as she struggled to pull herself up, arms shaking with the effort. "Hold on!" A familiar voice cut through the chaos. Heavy footfalls thundered up from above, and suddenly strong hands were gripping Faye's arms. She looked up into Whit Danner's worried face, his features thrown into sharp relief by her dropped flashlight spinning below. "I've got you!" he grunted, muscles straining as he hauled her up onto more solid footing. Without missing a beat, he braced himself against the wall and grabbed what was left of the railing, using his considerable strength to stabilize the wobbling structure. "Whit!" Faye gasped, relief flooding through her even as adrenaline continued to surge. "How did you—" "Later." He cut her off, already moving toward the frightened mother dog. "We need to move. Now." Together, they coaxed the trembling animal up the remaining steps. Whit's presence seemed to calm her, his steady voice and gentle hands helping her navigate past the damaged section. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew closer. "There's a maintenance ladder on the north side," Whit said as they reached the bell chamber. "Emergency access for the repair crews." He was already moving toward a heavy metal door, pushing it shut as soon as they were through. The solid clang echoed through the tower, followed by the scraping sound of Whit dragging a heavy wooden beam across it. "That won't hold them long," he warned, leading them to where a sturdy metal ladder descended the outer wall. "Ladies first, both of you." Faye helped the mother dog onto the ladder, supporting her as best she could while they made their careful way down. The cold metal rungs bit into her hands, already raw from catching herself earlier. Above them, she could hear the muffled sounds of someone throwing themselves against the blocked door. When they finally reached the ground, Whit's truck sat waiting in the shadows of the church, engine idling quietly. Without waiting for instructions, the mother dog jumped into the open passenger door as if she'd done it 100 times before. "The puppies," Faye said urgently, already moving toward the church's main entrance. "They're still in the supply closet near the vestry." "I'll get them," Whit said, catching her arm. "You stay with her. If those guys make it down, they'll be looking for you." He returned minutes later with both puppies tucked safely in his jacket, their little heads poking out as they squirmed with excitement at seeing their mother. As soon as Whit set them in the truck, the family reunion began with eager whimpers and gentle nuzzling. "We need to call this in," Whit said, pulling out his phone. He glanced at Faye. "How much can we say without mentioning my suspension?" Faye finished grimly. "Just report the damage to the tower and signs of break-in. Anonymous tip about suspicious activity." Whit made the call, choosing his words carefully. The dispatcher promised to send units, but her tone suggested it wasn't a top priority on a busy night. Faye fidgeted as she listened, knowing every minute gave the men more time to cover their tracks, or worse. "We can't wait for them," she said as soon as Whit hung up. "Those men were planning to torch the place. We need to get these dogs somewhere safe before they realize they're gone." "Faye," Whit's voice held a note of caution. "You're already skating on thin ice with your suspension. If we move evidence—" "They're not evidence, they're victims," Faye cut in, her voice fierce. And I know somewhere we can take them that's both safe and legal." Whit studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. "All right. Where to?" "Remember Amy Chen, the vet tech who helped with that rescue operation in Miller's Grove last year? She runs an emergency intake service now. She'll document everything properly, get them checked out, and keep them secure." They drove through the quiet streets of Haverfield, Whit taking a circuitous route to ensure they weren't followed. In the back seat, the mother dog had curled protectively around her puppies, all three finally sleeping soundly. Amy answered their urgent knock immediately, taking in the situation with professional efficiency. She didn't ask unnecessary questions as she documented the dog's conditions, photographing injuries and scanning for microchips. Her gentle hands and soft voice kept the animals calm through the entire process. "I'll register this as an emergency surrender case," she told them, already filling out the proper forms. "Everything by the book, but they'll be safe here until the authorities sort things out." While Amy settled the dogs in a comfortable kennel, Faye filled Whit in on everything she'd discovered. The illegal breeding operation in the boiler room, the overheard conversation about insurance fraud and arson, the suspicious crates labeled as roofing supplies. Whit listened intently, his face growing grimmer with each detail. When she finished, he pulled out his phone again, this time to take detailed photographs of the scratches and splinters on Faye's hands, the tears in her jacket, and timestamps of their location. "We'll take pictures of the tower damage at first light," he said. "Document everything before anyone can clean it up. Between that and Amy's intake records, we'll have enough to force a proper investigation." Faye nodded, exhaustion finally starting to creep in as the adrenaline wore off. She looked through the glass at the sleeping dogs, now clean and safe on soft blankets. "Thank you, Whit. For showing up when you did. For helping without asking questions first." "Hey," he said softly. "That's what friends are for. And you were right about all of it. Those dogs. The danger. Your instincts are still sharp as ever, suspension or not. They agreed to meet at dawn to photograph the bell tower and take their evidence to the proper authorities. Both believed they had broken the worst of the plot, that the rescue of the dogs would derail whatever plans had been in motion. As they left Amy's clinic, the night felt lighter somehow, despite everything that had happened. The mother dog and her puppies were safe. They had evidence of the crimes, and most importantly, Faye no longer felt alone in her fight. Having Whit at her side, his steady presence and unwavering support made her feel stronger than she had in months. The partnership that had been forged years ago in their shared dedication to rescue work had been tested and tempered tonight, emerging stronger than ever. Whatever came next, they would face it together. The morning sun cast long shadows across St. Bartholomew's lawn as two police cruisers pulled into the parking lot, their lights flashing silently in the dawn. Faye watched from the church steps, her stomach knotting as three officers approached. She recognized Officer Martinez, who had helped with search and rescue operations in the past. The look on his face told her this wasn't a friendly visit. "Miss Merritt," Officer Martinez said, his tone professional but strained. "We need to discuss a complaint filed by Mr. Gordon Lyle regarding theft of animals from a licensed kennel on church property." Faye's heart dropped. That wasn't a kennel. Those animals were being abused. The mother dog was chained up in the boiler room. "We have documentation showing proper licensing and registration." Martinez pulled out a thick folder. "Mr. Lyle has provided all the necessary paperwork. You had no authority to remove those animals." Before Faye could respond, another police car arrived. Gordon Lyle stepped out, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit, his silver hair catching the morning light. He nodded to the officers as if they were old friends. "There she is," Lyle announced, his voice carrying across the lawn. "I hate to do this, but we can't have unstable individuals breaking into church property and stealing animals in the middle of the night." Faye felt her face flush with anger. "Unstable? You're the one running an illegal breeding operation and planning to burn down." Officers, you see what I mean?" Lyle interrupted smoothly. "These wild accusations. First breaking and entering, now arson conspiracy theories. It's concerning behavior, especially given her history." Officer Martinez looked uncomfortable, but pulled out his handcuffs. "Miss Merritt, please turn around. You're under arrest for theft and breaking and entering." The cold metal clicked around her wrists as nearby church members gathered to watch. Faye caught glimpses of shocked faces and whispered conversations as she was led to the police car. Her cheeks burned with humiliation. At the station, they photographed and fingerprinted her like a common criminal. The holding cell was small and cold, the metal bench unyielding. Hours crawled by as she worried about the dogs. What would happen to them now? "Faye!" a familiar voice called out. Witt appeared at the cell door with a deputy, his face etched with concern. "I'm getting you out of here." "Bail's been posted." As they walked out of the station, Witt handed her a copy of the local paper. There on the front page was her old suspension story, dredged up and twisted into a new narrative. Former search and rescue handler, suspended for negligence, arrested for church break-in. "They're painting me as some kind of unstable vigilante," Faye said, her voice cracking. "How did Lyle pull this together so fast?" "Money talks," Witt replied grimly. "He's got connections everywhere, the board, animal control, the press." "But we know the truth, Faye. We just need to be patient and smart about this." "Patient?" Faye stopped walking. "While he does what?" "Those puppies, Witt. You should have seen their eyes when I found them at the statue. They were terrified." "I know, but rushing in got you arrested. We need a better plan." Later that afternoon, Faye watched from the shadows as Lyle led a group of board members around the church grounds. His voice carried across the courtyard as he gestured dramatically at the roof. "As you can see, the repairs are desperately needed. The fundraising walkthrough today will help us address these critical infrastructure issues." The group nodded along, impressed by his commanding presence and apparent concern for the church. Faye noticed how he smoothly guided them past the vestry without pause, keeping their attention focused upward on the roof. When the tour moved to the garden, Faye slipped inside the church. She made her way toward the boiler room, noting fresh repairs that hadn't been there before. New drywall had been hastily installed, and a heavy-duty padlock secured the door. But what caught her eye were the small details: patches of fresh paint covering what looked like scorch marks, a drop cloth positioned oddly against one wall as if hiding something. Her trained eye picked up other inconsistencies: recent scratches on the floor that had been poorly concealed, a faint chemical smell that didn't match typical cleaning products. Every instinct told her the danger wasn't over. Lyle was covering his tracks, but he was doing it quickly and sloppily. The sound of approaching voices sent her retreating to her custodial closet. Through the crack in the door, she watched Lyle and two men she didn't recognize pass by, speaking in low tones. "Everything's been handled," Lyle was saying. "The animals are back where they belong, and that nosy custodian won't be a problem anymore. Her credibility is shot." "Good," one of the men replied. "We can't afford any more complications." Faye waited until their footsteps faded before emerging. Her hands shook as she gripped her mop handle, but not from fear, from determination. Lyle might have won this round, using his money and influence to discredit her and reclaim the puppies, but she'd seen enough in her years of search and rescue to know what evidence looked like, even when someone tried to hide it. The memory of those puppies pawing at Jesus' statue feet flooded back, their trembling bodies, their trusting eyes. She might be officially boxed out now, labeled as unstable and stripped of credibility, but she couldn't ignore what she'd seen. The fresh paint, the hidden scorches, that suspicious drop cloth, all of it pointed to ongoing danger. Her phone buzzed with a text from Witt. "Hang in there. Truth always comes out eventually." Faye stared at the message, then at the locked boiler room door. Lyle had the power to control the narrative, to make her look crazy, to reclaim those innocent animals with his seemingly airtight paperwork. But paper trails could be followed both ways, and she knew something he didn't. When you're trying to cover up evidence in a hurry, you always miss something. She pulled out her phone and started documenting everything she could see. The fresh paint, the scratches, the oddly placed drop cloth. If Lyle thought discrediting her would make her back down, he didn't understand what drove her. This wasn't about her reputation anymore. It was about those frightened eyes at the statue, that wounded mother dog, and whatever was still happening behind that locked door. The church bells chimed the hour, their sound echoing through the empty halls. Somewhere in the building, Lyle was probably still leading his tour, playing the role of concerned board chairman raising funds for the roof. But down here in the basement, away from the polished performance above, the evidence of his true activities remained, hastily hidden, but not erased. Faye touched the cold metal of the new padlock, then pulled back as footsteps approached. She melted into the shadows, watching as a maintenance worker she didn't recognize hurried past with painting supplies. More cover-up work, no doubt. But every fresh coat of paint, every new lock, every attempt to hide the truth only confirmed what she already knew. The danger wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Through a nearby window, she could see Lyle's expensive car in the parking lot, its polished surface reflecting the afternoon sun. He might have the power to control the narrative right now, to make her look unstable and discredit her warnings. But Faye had something he couldn't buy or manipulate. Years of training in finding what others tried to hide, and a determination that grew stronger with every attempt to silence her. The search and rescue whistle still hung around her neck, hidden beneath her shirt. She touched it briefly, drawing strength from the familiar shape. Her suspension might have taken her off official duties, but it hadn't erased her skills or her instincts, and right now, those instincts were screaming that beneath all Lyle's institutional power, plays, and careful cover-ups, something dangerous was still brewing in St. Bartholomew's. Faye stood with her arms crossed, watching as Gordon Lyle led the small group through St. Bartholomew's grounds toward the kennel area. The morning air was crisp, and her breath formed small clouds in front of her face. 2 animal control officers flanked her, their presence a clear message that she wasn't trusted alone near the puppies. "As you can see," Lyle announced, gesturing broadly, "everything is completely up to code." The kennel inspection is merely a formality. His expensive wool coat seemed to repel both the cold and the scrutiny of the officials accompanying them. Faye's heart clenched as they approached the chain-link enclosure where the 2 puppies huddled together. Their tails drooped when they saw Lyle, but their eyes locked onto Faye with an intensity that made her breath catch. Something about their gaze seemed familiar, too familiar. While Lyle distracted the officers with paperwork, Faye's hand slipped into her pocket, fingers closing around her old search and rescue whistle. It was muscle memory, really, the way she'd always called her dogs during training. Without thinking too hard about it, she brought the whistle to her lips and gave 2 soft notes, barely audible above the morning breeze. The change in the puppies was instant and shocking. Both snapped to attention, their bodies straightening as if pulled by invisible strings. They moved in perfect unison, assuming a perfect heel position even within their enclosure. Faye's heart nearly stopped. "No," she whispered. "It can't be." But it was. She knew that response, had trained it countless times. These weren't just random puppies, they were Ranger's offspring. Her beloved search and rescue partner before the suspension had sired these pups, and someone had trained them using her exact methods. "Is everything all right, Ms. Merritt?" one of the animal control officers asked, noting her pale face. "Fine," Faye managed, her mind racing. "Just checking their responsiveness." Later that afternoon, Faye sat in her small office, surrounded by stacks of papers and her laptop. Her fingers flew across the keyboard as she dug through recent shelter reports, looking for anything that might explain the puppy's training. A name jumped out at her from a report dated 3 months ago. Kelsey Vaughn. The report was brief but telling. Kelsey, a shelter technician, had filed concerns about suspicious litters connected to properties owned by Gordon Lyle. The puppies' ages and breeding patterns didn't match legitimate kennel operations, but what really made Faye's blood run cold was the note at the bottom. Employee has not reported for scheduled shifts since filing report. Current whereabouts unknown. Faye's phone buzzed. Whit had texted back about the missing person report she'd asked him to check. Her hands shook slightly as she read his message. Report filed but marked inactive. No follow-up investigation. Weird. The pieces started falling into place with terrifying clarity. The puppies at the statue hadn't been begging for themselves. They were trying to alert someone about a trapped human, someone who knew Faye's training methods, who had worked with dogs, who had discovered something she wasn't supposed to see. Faye jumped up from her desk, grabbing her coat. She called Whit as she hurried through the church corridors. "Meet me at St. Bart's," she said when he answered. "I know what the puppies were trying to tell us." The statue wasn't random. It's right above the old heating infrastructure. Remember those airflow patterns we mapped? "On my way," Whit replied without hesitation. 10 minutes. When Whit arrived, Faye had already spread out the building's architectural plans across a table in the maintenance room. Her finger traced the maze of tunnels beneath the nave. "Look," she said, pointing to a section of the blueprints. "These old heating tunnels were part of the original church structure. They're mostly sealed off now, but they're connected to the newer systems. The airflow patterns we found, the way the puppies kept returning to that statue, they were marking the spot above where someone could be trapped, but still getting enough air to survive." Whit leaned over the plans, his firefighter's training kicking in. "These tunnels would maintain a consistent temperature," he said slowly. "And there are multiple air exchange points. If someone was trapped down there, they could survive," Faye finished. "Especially if they had help from 2 very well-trained puppies who knew exactly where to go for help." Together, they began mapping potential access points and air circulation patterns. Whit's experience with building ventilation systems proved invaluable as they narrowed down the most likely locations where someone could be hidden. "Kelsey must have trained the puppies before she disappeared," Faye said, her voice tight with emotion. "She used my methods. She must have worked with Ranger at some point, learned my training techniques. When she realized she was in danger, she taught them to seek help." "Smart woman," Whit said grimly. "She knew the puppies would recognize you, another handler. She left us a living breadcrumb trail." They focused on a particular section of tunnel beneath the nave, where several ventilation shafts converged. The area was accessible through a maintenance hatch that hadn't been opened in years, or at least hadn't been opened officially. "That's where we need to look," Faye said, her voice firm with conviction. "But we'll need help. If Kelsey's down there, she's been trapped for months. We can't go in without proper backup and medical support." Whit nodded, already pulling out his phone. "I know some people we can trust, emergency response teams who won't ask too many questions until we get her out. But Faye," he placed a hand on her arm, "we need to be careful. If we're right about this, Lyle's not just running an illegal breeding operation. He's involved in something much worse." "I know," Faye said quietly. "But those puppies risked everything to get our attention. They're counting on us to understand their message, and somewhere down there, Kelsey's been waiting for someone to decode it." They spent the next hour meticulously documenting their findings and preparing for what would come next. The weight of their discovery hung heavy in the air. This wasn't just about saving puppies anymore. It was about uncovering a truth that someone had gone to great lengths to bury. As they worked, Faye couldn't help but think of the puppies, now back in Lyle's custody. They had done their job with remarkable dedication, carrying out their training exactly as they'd been taught. Just like their father, Ranger, they had proven that sometimes the most important messages come not in words, but in the unwavering loyalty of a dog determined to complete its mission. The revelation that these puppies were Ranger's offspring felt like both a wound and a blessing. It hurt to be reminded of her past, of the partner she'd lost to suspension. But it also felt like validation, proof that her training methods, her instincts, had created a legacy that was now helping to save lives in ways she never could have imagined. The evening shadows stretched long across St. Bartholomew's grounds as Faye made her way toward the sacristy. The old stone building loomed against the darkening sky, its familiar silhouette both comforting and ominous. The air felt heavy with the promise of rain, and distant thunder rumbled beyond the hills. Edna Jo Pierce stood in the doorway of the sacristy, her thin frame illuminated by the warm light spilling from inside. Her weathered hand smoothed her flour-dusted apron, a habit from decades of service to the church. Her eyes, though aged, held a sharp clarity that made Faye pause. "Come in quickly, dear," Edna whispered, ushering Faye inside with a gentle urgency. "I've been waiting for the right moment to speak with you." The sacristy smelled of beeswax and old wood, a scent that had permeated the space over countless years of preparing communion vessels and storing sacred vestments. Edna closed the heavy wooden door behind them with practiced care, ensuring it made no sound. "I've seen you searching," Edna said, her voice low but steady. "And I've been watching too. Things aren't right here, haven't been for days." She reached into her apron pocket and withdrew something that glinted dully in the fading light. An old iron key, its surface worn smooth by time and use. "What's this?" Faye asked, though her heart had already begun to race with anticipation. Edna pressed the key into Faye's palm. The metal was warm from being carried close to the elderly woman's body. "It's the key to the old coal chute," she explained, her fingers lingering over Faye's hand. "The one beneath the statue of Jesus." Faye's breath caught. "The statue where the puppies were found?" "The very same," Edna nodded, moving to sit in her familiar chair by the vestment cabinet. "You see, that statue wasn't always there. It was placed there specifically to mark the fuel fill for the ancient boiler system. Back when the church first got central heating, they needed a way to know where to deliver the coal." The pieces began falling into place in Faye's mind like tumblers in a lock. She pulled out her phone and quickly texted Whit. "Need you here. Sacristy, now." "There's more," Edna continued, her voice taking on an urgent tone. "A few days ago, I heard the strangest sounds while I was preparing the altar cloths. Scraping, like something moving in the floor grates. I thought it might be rats at first, but it wasn't the same. It was different, more deliberate." Faye's training kicked in, her mind mapping the building's infrastructure. "The heating tunnels," she murmured. "They run under the entire church, don't they?" "Like a maze," Edna confirmed. "My late husband used to help maintain them. They're mostly abandoned now, but they're still there, running all through the foundation." The door opened quietly, and Whit slipped in, his firefighter's instincts making him move with surprising stealth for his size. He took in the scene with a quick glance, noting the key in Faye's hand and the intense expression on her face. "Kelsey," Faye said, turning to face him. She must have found her way into the service corridors when she was running. "The puppies. They were trained. They knew to go to the statue because it marks the access point. They were trying to lead us to her." Whit's expression grew grave. "If she's down there." He didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew the dangers of confined spaces, especially ones that hadn't been maintained in years. "We need to move fast," Faye said, already pulling out her phone to check the weather radar. The storm system was moving in quickly, dark red and purple blooms spreading across the screen. "But we have to be smart about this. Those tunnels could be full of gas pockets, and with all the accelerant Lyle's men have been storing, one spark could turn the whole system into a chimney." Whit finished, running a hand through his hair. "We'll need equipment. Gas detectors, harnesses, first aid supplies." Faye nodded, feeling the familiar weight of command settling over her shoulders. Despite her suspension, despite everything that had happened, this was what she was trained for. This was what she did best. "I can get what we need from the station," Whit offered, "but we'll have to cache it somewhere safe, somewhere Lyle won't find it." "The old groundskeeper's shed," Edna suggested, her voice stronger now. "Nobody's used it since we switched to the riding mower. I have the key for that, too." They spent the next hour planning, mapping out their approach on the back of an old church bulletin. Whit would bring the equipment: gas detectors, safety harnesses, first aid supplies, and even a special harness designed for dog rescues that might help them with Kelsey if she was too weak to move on her own. "We'll enter through the coal chute," Faye explained, tracing their route with her finger. "Follow the air currents. They'll be our best guide in the dark. We'll need to test for gas pockets at every junction and absolutely no open flames or anything that could create a spark." Thunder crashed outside, closer now, and the first heavy drops of rain began to hit the sacristy windows. Edna crossed herself, a gesture born of years of habit. "You'll have to hurry," she said softly. "If those men come back, if they decide to pour their accelerant down that fill point—" "We know," Faye said, reaching out to squeeze the older woman's hand. "We'll find her, Edna. I promise." As they finalized their plans, Faye felt a strange mix of emotions washing over her. The suspension that had been weighing her down seemed less important now, replaced by the fierce focus she remembered from her search and rescue days. This was what she was meant to do: help those who couldn't help themselves, trust her instincts, and never give up until the job was done. The storm was building outside, wind beginning to howl around the ancient stone walls of St. Bartholomew's. Time was running out. If Lyle's men returned, if they decided to move forward with their plan to burn the evidence of their operation, the very tunnels that might be sheltering Kelsey could become her tomb. Whit checked his watch and nodded to Faye. "I'll get the equipment and meet you at the shed in 20 minutes. We do this right, we do this careful, but we do this now." Faye closed her hand around the old iron key, feeling its weight, its significance. From the worn chair by the vestment cabinet, Edna watched them with bright, knowing eyes. "God be with you both," she whispered, and in the growing storm, her words carried the weight of a blessing. Thunder cracked overhead like a celestial whip as Faye and Whit stood at the entrance to the coal chute, their flashlights cutting thin beams through the darkness. The old iron door groaned as they pulled it open, revealing a black maw that seemed to breathe stale, musty air into their faces. "Remember," Whit whispered, checking his equipment one final time. "We move slow and steady." No rushed movements. His normally confident voice carried an edge of concern as he glanced at the storm clouds roiling above them. Faye nodded, double-checking the straps on her harness. The familiar weight of her search and rescue gear brought back memories of countless missions, but this one felt different. Personal. Someone's life hung in the balance, and time was working against them. "Gas meter first," she said, pulling out the pocket-sized detector. "Then we count the crossbeams, if we lose our bearings down there." She didn't need to finish the thought. They both knew the dangers of getting lost in the maze of underground tunnels. The first few feet of descent were the hardest. The coal chute, unused for decades, was barely wide enough for their shoulders. Every movement had to be calculated, every breath measured. The metal walls, slick with condensation, seemed to close in around them. Whit went first, his broad frame barely squeezing through the narrow passage. His firefighter's training showed in every careful movement, in the way he tested each handhold before putting his weight on it. Faye followed close behind, keeping one eye on the gas meter's digital display and the other on their surroundings. "Crossbeam 1," Whit called softly, his voice echoing strangely in the confined space. The sound of thunder was muffled now, but they could feel the vibrations through the metal chute. The descent continued, marked by quiet counting and the soft beep of the gas meter. "Crossbeam 2, 3, 4. Each beam brought them deeper into the earth, into the forgotten infrastructure beneath St. Bartholomew's. At the bottom of the chute, they found themselves in a low-ceilinged tunnel. Decades of dust lay undisturbed, except for a single set of small footprints, Kelsey's trail, hopefully leading them to where she had taken refuge. "Gas readings are steady," Faye reported, sweeping her flashlight beam across the tunnel walls. "But we need to watch for pockets, especially near the junctions." They moved forward in a practiced rhythm, Whit leading while Faye monitored the air quality. The tunnel branched several times, but they followed the footprints and the slight current of air that suggested a path to the main heating system. Suddenly, a sharp crackling sound split the silence. Blue sparks spat from an ancient electrical relay box mounted on the wall, casting eerie shadows across the curved ceiling. Whit reacted instantly, years of firefighting experience taking over. "Kill your light!" he commanded, already reaching for the electrical panel nearby. Faye's flashlight clicked off immediately, plunging them into total darkness, broken only by the dangerous dance of sparks. Whit worked by touch, finding the main switch and throwing it with decisive force. The sparking ceased, but another problem immediately became apparent: the distinct hiss of escaping gas. "Seeping line," Whit muttered, his voice tight with concentration. Must have been jarred loose by the electrical surge. He pulled a pipe clamp from his gear bag, working by feel in the darkness. "Light," he said quietly. "Just for a second, aimed at the floor." Faye complied, providing just enough illumination for Whit to position the clamp properly. The hissing gradually diminished as he tightened it, finally stopping altogether. They both released held breaths. "That was too close," Faye said, her heart pounding. The near miss reminded her of how precarious their situation was. One spark in the wrong place, with the right concentration of gas. She pulled out her old search and rescue whistle, the familiar weight comforting in her hand. 2 quick notes, pitched just right. The same signal she had used countless times before. The sound carried down the tunnel, bouncing off the walls. For a moment, only silence answered. Then, faintly but distinctly, they heard it. A human voice, weak but unmistakable, calling out. "This way," Faye said, already moving. They followed the sound, having to backtrack once when they hit a dead end, but finally found themselves in a slightly larger chamber that must have once housed part of the heating system. Their flashlight beams found Kelsey huddled in a corner, the mother dog pressed protectively against her side. The young woman's face was pale and drawn with pain, but her eyes were alert and filled with relief at the sight of her rescuers. "Thank God," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "I was starting to think." She tried to move and gasped in pain. Faye was already kneeling beside her, professional training taking over. "Don't try to move yet. Let me check you over." Her hands moved efficiently, assessing Kelsey's condition. The broken leg was obvious, swollen and at an awkward angle, but it was the shallow, rapid breathing that concerned her most. "Signs of shock," she reported to Whit, who was already pulling medical supplies from his pack. "We need to stabilize the leg before we move her." The mother dog watched them work, her dark eyes intelligent and concerned. Faye took a moment to clip a harness onto her, knowing the dog's presence would help keep Kelsey calm during the difficult extraction ahead. "This is going to hurt," Faye warned as she prepared to splint the broken leg. "But we have to do it before we can move you. The tunnel isn't safe." As if to emphasize her point, the gas meter emitted a sharp warning beep. The display showed rising levels of volatile fumes. The accelerant Lyle's men had stored was beginning to seep into the tunnel system. "We need to move," Whit said urgently. "Those fumes hit the right concentration." Faye worked as quickly as she dared, wrapping and splinting the broken leg while Kelsey bit back cries of pain. The mother dog pressed closer, offering what comfort she could. Above them, thunder crashed so loudly they could feel it in their bones. The storm was directly overhead now, and with it came a new danger, the risk of electrical surges through the ancient wiring system. "Okay," Faye said, securing the last strap on the splint. "We're going to have to belly crawl back to the coal chute. There's no room to stand in some sections." She looked at Kelsey seriously. "It's going to be rough, but we'll take it slow and steady." They began the painstaking journey back, timing their movements between the crashes of thunder. Whit led the way, while Faye helped guide Kelsey, who could only move by pushing with her good leg and pulling with her arms. The mother dog followed faithfully, her presence seeming to give Kelsey strength. The gas meter's warnings became more frequent as they progressed, its display showing dangerous levels of fumes building in the tunnel system. They had to pause several times to let Kelsey rest, each delay making the situation more precarious. Finally, they reached the base of the coal chute. This would be the most difficult part, getting Kelsey up and out while protecting her injured leg. The thunder crashed again, and they could see flashes of lightning through the open hatch above. "We'll have to time this carefully," Whit said, studying the storm's rhythm. "Those lightning strikes could energize the whole chute if we're touching it at the wrong moment." They waited for a break in the thunder, then began the careful process of moving Kelsey up the chute. Whit went first, positioning himself to help pull from above while Faye supported from below. The mother dog watched anxiously as they inched Kelsey upward, every movement causing her to wince in pain. The final moment came as another lightning bolt split the sky. Whit, braced at the top of the chute, reached down and carefully lifted Kelsey onto his shoulders. With one final effort, they emerged into the pouring rain. Kelsey, exhausted and soaked, managed to whisper one word before losing consciousness. Lyle. The name carried all the weight of the truth they had fought so hard to uncover. For a moment, they stood in the driving rain, the unconscious Kelsey cradled in Whit's arms, the mother dog pressing against Faye's legs. They had done it. Found the survivor, prevented a disaster, and brought the truth into the light. The rain pounded down, washing away the dust and grime of the tunnels. Thunder still rolled overhead, but it seemed less threatening now. They had won this round, rescued Kelsey before the fumes could ignite, before Lyle's plans could claim another victim. Faye looked at Whit, saw the same mix of exhaustion and triumph in his eyes that she felt in her heart. They had trained for moments like this, prepared for the worst while hoping for the best. Today their preparation had paid off. The mother dog shook herself, spraying water in all directions, and the simple, normal action broke the spell of the moment. They needed to get Kelsey to safety, to medical care, to somewhere she could tell her story and expose the truth about Lyle's operation. But for just that one moment, standing in the rain with the rescued survivor and the faithful dog, it felt like a perfect victory. They had trusted their training, followed their instincts, and saved a life. Sometimes, Faye thought, that was all that mattered. Their moment of victory shattered like glass. Through the rain-streaked darkness, they saw figures moving near the church entrance. Gordon Lyle, his face twisted with desperation, barked orders at two men who carried a metal cage containing the whimpering puppies. They positioned it near the nave, right by the statue that had started it all. The sharp smell of gasoline cut through the rain. Lyle was going through with his plan, despite everything. Despite Kelsey being found. Despite the evidence mounting against him. He was choosing to burn it all rather than face the consequences. The first flames licked up the ancient wooden doors, spreading with terrifying speed across surfaces already prepped with accelerant. Orange light danced through the stained glass windows, distorting the holy figures into writhing shapes. Distant sirens wailed, but they seemed too far away. Faye's heart stopped as she heard the puppies' frantic yipping through the thickening smoke. Without thinking, without hearing Whit's shouted warning, she charged towards the entrance. "Faye!" "No!" Whit's voice cracked with fear behind her. The heat hit her like a physical wall as she burst through the doors. Smoke punched into her lungs, making her cough violently. She dropped low, crawling toward the sound of the puppies' cries. Through watering eyes, she could just make out the cage's outline. A tremendous crack split the air. A burning beam crashed down beside the statue, missing Faye by inches. The impact sent sparks swirling through the smoke-filled air. Above, the ceiling groaned ominously. Reaching the cage, Faye shrugged off her coat and threw it over the frightened pups. Her fingers, already burning from the heat, wrestled with the twisted latch. It wouldn't budge. She yanked harder, ignoring the searing pain in her hands. Suddenly, Whit was beside her, his firefighter's training evident in his measured movements. Together, they worked the latch free. The ceiling gave another threatening crack above them. "Run!" Whit grabbed both Faye and the cage, practically carrying them toward the exit. They staggered out into the rain just as the roof collapsed behind them, sending a blast of hot air that knocked them forward. They hit the wet stone hard, coughing and gasping. But the puppies were alive, squirming under Faye's coat, safe from the inferno that was consuming the church. Through bleary eyes, Faye could see the ambulance where Kelsey was being treated. The mother dog sat vigilantly beside it, while Edna stood nearby, ready to tell what she knew. The church might be gutted, the physical evidence destroyed, but they had something more valuable, living proof of Lyle's crimes and witnesses ready to speak the truth. In the quiet hospital waiting room, Faye sat with her laptop open, organizing the evidence they'd gathered. Her fingers moved quickly across the keyboard, creating a timeline that connected all the pieces. Whit sat beside her, spreading out the photos he'd taken in the tunnels on the small table between them. "These shots of the clamped gas line are crystal clear," Faye said, picking up one of the photographs. The image showed the corroded pipe with Whit's emergency clamp still attached, preventing what could have been a devastating explosion. "And look at this one of the scorched relay. You can see where the initial spark would have triggered everything." Whit nodded, pulling out more photos. "I made sure to document everything from multiple angles. No one can claim these were doctored or unclear." Down the hall, Kelsey was resting comfortably in her hospital room, her leg properly set and healing. She'd already given a detailed statement to the police, naming names and dates that tied directly to Lyle's illegal breeding operation. Her voice had been steady as she described how she'd discovered the truth and been forced to hide in the tunnels to escape Lyle's men. "Edna's statement about the fill cap is crucial," Faye said, pulling out a worn piece of paper covered in the elderly sacristan's neat handwriting. She remembers exactly when she first noticed the scraping sounds, and her description of the original church blueprints proves the statue's location wasn't random. "And we've got these," Whit added, sliding over a thick folder of veterinary records. They'd worked with the vet tech who'd initially helped them hide the dogs to trace the puppy's lineage. The DNA tests confirmed what Faye had suspected. They were indeed descended from her former search and rescue dog, Ranger. Faye touched the papers gently, remembering how the puppies had responded to her whistle that day at the kennel. "This proves Kelsey trained them using my old methods. She must have studied Ranger's techniques when she worked at the shelter." The sound of heavy boots in the hallway made them look up. Fire Marshal Thompson entered the waiting room, his weathered face serious but attentive. He'd been skeptical when they'd first reached out, but agreed to hear them out after seeing the preliminary evidence. "Show me what you've got," he said, pulling up a chair. For the next hour, Faye methodically laid out their case. She started with the discovery of the puppies at the statue, then walked through the evidence step by step. The accelerant trail they'd found, the modified fuel fill system beneath the statue, and the insurance policy changes Lyle had recently made to the church's coverage. He increased the coverage by 300% just 2 weeks before the fire, Faye explained, showing the marshal the documentation, and added specific riders for historical restoration that would have tripled the payout. The marshal's expression grew more focused as Faye connected the dots. He studied the photos of the gas line and relay, asking pointed technical questions that Whit answered with precise detail. "The timing of everything is too perfect to be coincidence," Faye continued. "The insurance changes, the trapped witness, the attempted arson, it all points to a coordinated plan." Marshal Thompson leaned back in his chair, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "You've got compelling evidence, but Lyle has influence in this town. Taking him down won't be easy." "That's why we want to do it publicly," Whit said, pulling out a glossy invitation. "Lyle's hosting a gala at his dealership next week. He's announcing a historic expansion of his business empire." Faye nodded. "It's the perfect opportunity. He'll have his guard down, surrounded by all the people he thinks support him. We can present the evidence where he can't hide from it." The marshal studied the invitation. "You'll need someone with authority there to make it stick. Someone he can't dismiss or intimidate." "That's where you come in," Whit said. "I can get you in discreetly through the service entrance. We've already arranged for Edna to be there with the original church blueprints. She can point out the fill mechanism and verify the timeline of changes Lyle made." Marshal Thompson was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he nodded. "I'll bring my team." But everything needs to be airtight. No loose ends he can use to wiggle free. Faye felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach, but pushed it aside. We know he'll try to discredit us again. He's already tried to paint me as unstable, tried to silence Kelsey completely. But this time we have proof from multiple sources, and most importantly, we have lives we saved to back up our claims. They spent the next few hours refining their plan. Whit coordinated with the Marshals team, working out the logistics of their entrance and positioning. Edna arrived with the blueprints, her quiet determination, a reminder of how many people Lyle had hurt with his schemes. As evening approached, Faye stood at the hospital window, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. She thought about all the times Lyle had seemed untouchable, how he'd used his money and influence to stay above the law. But now they had him cornered, with evidence he couldn't buy his way out of. "You okay?" Whit asked, coming to stand beside her. "Just thinking about what's ahead," she replied. "We'll only get one shot at this. It has to work." Whit squeezed her shoulder gently. "It will. Look at everything we've put together. The photos, the statements, the records. It's all rock solid. And we have something else too." "What's that?" "The truth," he said simply. "Sometimes that's all you need." Faye smiled, touching the stack of evidence they'd assembled. Each piece told part of the story. The gas line that could have killed them all, the puppies that led them to Kelsey, the old church plans that revealed Lyle's scheme. Together, they formed a picture even Lyle couldn't talk his way out of. They spent the rest of the evening going over every detail one more time. The marshal made copies of all their evidence, securing it in case Lyle tried any last-minute interference. Edna practiced pointing out the key areas on the blueprints, her knowledge of the church's history adding weight to their case. As night fell, Faye felt a calm certainty settle over her. Yes, Lyle would try to fight back. Yes, he would attempt to discredit and silence her again. But this time she wasn't standing alone. She had Whit's unwavering support, Edna's quiet wisdom, Kelsey's brave testimony, and most importantly, she had the truth documented from every angle. The gala was 3 days away. 3 days to perfect their approach, to ensure every piece of evidence was properly prepared and protected. 3 days until they would finally bring Gordon Lyle's carefully constructed facade crashing down around him. The gleaming showroom of Lyle Motors sparkled under crystal chandeliers, filled with Haverfield's elite in their finest evening wear. Champagne flowed freely as Gordon Lyle's annual charity gala reached its peak, with donors mingling between polished luxury vehicles arranged like museum pieces on the pristine floor. Faye Merritt stood near the entrance, her simple black dress a stark contrast to the glittering gowns around her. Her hands nervously smoothed the folder she carried as she watched Whit Danner help Kelsey Vaughn navigate her wheelchair through the crowd. The young shelter tech looked pale but determined, her leg still in a cast from her ordeal in the church tunnels. "You ready for this?" Whit asked quietly, his steady presence beside her a comfort. He wore a crisp dark suit that made him look more formal than his usual firefighter gear, but his eyes held the same unwavering support she'd come to rely on. "As ready as I'll ever be," Faye replied, scanning the room. She spotted several plainclothes deputies strategically positioned among the guests, and Fire Marshal Thompson discussing wine vintages with a group of donors near the stage. Everything was in place. Gordon Lyle commanded attention at the center of the room, resplendent in an expensive tuxedo with his signature heavy rings catching the light as he gestured. "Friends, what a magnificent turnout. Your generosity will help us build an even grander future for our community." His booming voice carried across the showroom as he worked the crowd. Faye noticed how his confident smile faltered slightly when he caught sight of her, though he quickly covered it with practiced charm. "And now," Lyle continued, "I'd like to invite one of our dedicated church staff members to say a few words about our rebuilding efforts. Faye Merritt, would you join me?" It was the opening they'd planned for. Faye made her way to the small podium, feeling the weight of all eyes upon her. The folder in her hands contained everything. Photos, blueprints, veterinary records, witness statements. She took a deep breath and began. Thank you, Mr. Lyle. I'd like to talk about rebuilding, but not just the church. I want to talk about rebuilding trust and justice and bringing truth into the light. She opened the folder deliberately. Let me tell you a story about a statue, a gas line, and a very carefully planned insurance fraud. The room went deadly quiet. Lyle's face hardened as Faye methodically laid out the evidence, the ancient fill cap beneath the statue that provided access to the tunnels, the tampered gas line Whit had photographed, the timing of insurance policy riders. She produced Edna's sworn statement about the odd sounds and the original blueprints showing the underground infrastructure. But the most damning evidence came from two unlikely heroes. Faye continued, gesturing to where Kelsey sat. Two puppies, descendants of my old search and rescue dog, who led us to Kelsey Vaughn, a brave young woman who discovered Mr. Lyle's illegal breeding operation and nearly died trying to expose it. Kelsey wheeled forward, her voice clear and strong as she detailed the horrors she'd witnessed in Lyle's kennels. The crowd murmured in growing outrage as the full scope of his crimes became clear. Lyle's face had gone from red to purple. This is preposterous! Security, remove these people immediately! But when his security team stepped forward, they found themselves blocked by deputies who had shed their civilian disguises. Fire Marshal Thompson strode to the podium, warrant in hand. Gordon Lyle, you're under arrest for attempted murder, arson, insurance fraud, animal cruelty, and operating an illegal breeding facility. With a roar of rage, Lyle lunged at Faye, shoving her hard toward the mezzanine's glass railing. She felt the barrier give way behind her, shards of glass raining down as she started to fall. But Whit's strong hands grabbed her arms, yanking her back to safety as deputies swarmed forward to subdue Lyle. The scene dissolved into controlled chaos. Guests gasped and backed away as Lyle was wrestled into handcuffs, still shouting threats and denials. Computer equipment was seized, breeding records confiscated, and accounts frozen on the spot. Faye stood watching, Whit's protective arm around her shoulders, as justice finally caught up with Gordon Lyle. The aftermath unfolded over the following days with satisfying thoroughness. Criminal charges were filed, backed by overwhelming evidence. Lyle's assets were frozen pending massive forfeitures. His breeding permits were permanently revoked, and the full scope of his operation exposed to public scrutiny. Weeks passed, bringing healing and renewal. Kelsey's leg mended as she testified against Lyle, her courage helping to ensure he would face the fullest penalties possible. The rescued animals found loving homes through legitimate shelters. The mother dog was adopted by a family with young children, while the other surviving dogs were carefully placed with experienced owners. But the sweetest victory came when Faye received official notice of her reinstatement to the search and rescue team. Her instincts and actions had been fully vindicated, her skills proven vital in saving Kelsey's life. And the two puppies who had started it all, the ones who had pawed at the statue that fateful morning, found their forever home with Faye. On a crisp evening weeks later, Faye walked the two growing pups past the church grounds. The statue still stood, somehow untouched by the fire that had gutted the building. Construction crews were already at work rebuilding, but this time with honest permits and legitimate contractors. Whit fell into step beside her, reaching down to scratch behind the pup's ears. They had walked this route many times during the investigation, but tonight felt different. The air was clearer somehow, full of possibility. You know, Whit said carefully, we make a pretty good team. On duty and off. Faye looked up at him, seeing the question in his eyes. We do, she agreed softly. I was thinking maybe we could make this partnership official. In a more personal way. He took her hand, his grip warm and steady. What do you say? Faye's heart swelled as she squeezed his hand back. All the pieces had fallen into place. Her reinstatement, justice served, and now this man who had stood beside her, through it all, offering a future built on the foundations of skill, courage, and hard-won trust. Yes, she said simply, and felt the rightness of it settle into her bones as Whit's face lit up with joy. The puppies danced around their feet, tails wagging as if they approved of this new chapter beginning. As they continued their walk hand in hand, Faye felt profound gratitude for everything that had led to this moment, even the painful parts. Sometimes the hardest trials forged the strongest bonds, and the darkest times revealed the brightest truth, that faith, determination, and doing what was right would always light the way forward. The church would be rebuilt, stronger than before. Justice had prevailed. And here, walking past the statue where it all began, Faye had found not just vindication, but a partnership that would carry her into whatever challenges lay ahead. She squeezed Whit's hand again, and together they walked into the gathering dusk, two hearts now beating as one, with two faithful pups leading the way home. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.